Hello there. Seems like I've spent like half my life to uncovering two of the biggest mysteries of the universe. One is incommensurability, and the other one is magnetism. I've conquered both, and the one thing that shocks me about understanding both is that they are beyond divinely simple. And simplicity is divinity, as I've said, but they're not simplex. Most fundamentally simple things are usually the hardest things to explain, usually because they involve transcendent principles or metaphysical principles of ontology, which are antecedent to phenomena. And this is all human beings know. They know phenomena. They know how to add things. And I'm actually going to talk about a few numbers in this video. But it has to be said that there are no numbers in nature. Numbers, of course, are reified concepts invented by... I had to adjust my fireplace here. There we go. Numbers are reified concepts invented by human beings to codify things and the ability to count them, stick them into algorithms and into formulas. One of the ancient secrets of the Pythagoreans, and we certainly don't know who came up with it in the discovery. They didn't come up with it. It's fundamental, completely prior to this entire universe and our world. So we can't say they came up with it like somebody invented something new, like a toaster oven or a computer. The principle of incommensurability, and the reason why my discovery, 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3, and of course there could have been a discovery of the ancient Pythagoreans, specifically in Plato's Republic 509d to 511, which is the divided line section, where you actually draw out a line, you divide it unevenly, and you take each of those two sections and divide it again unevenly. You end up with a proportionality of phi, 1, 1, and 1 over phi, and the totality of all of that is phi cubed, or 4.23606. And of course these are all numbers, but these numbers are representative of something that of course is transcendent. There are no numbers in nature. Nature only knows pressure mediation. It's as simple as that. The one thing that we can say that exists, I don't know if it's rumor or true, obviously since it's very ancient, that the Pythagoreans actually drowned a person. They ended him, was for, as the saying goes, from thousands of years ago. So we're talking about a rumor from thousands of years ago, that they drowned someone for spilling the secrets of incommensurability. The secrets of incommensurability is a reference to why is anything at all. What is the nature of causation? What is first cause? And of course in monistic metaphysics, vis-a-vis the Platonists, the Egyptians, and the likes of original Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, there is no first cause, there is no prima causa, there is no original sin. It's the explanation for why anything is at all. Why the Pythagoreans thought that this was the one secret for which they would drown somebody in the middle of a lake for. We could speculate about that endlessly, and that speculation won't serve any purpose. But what is that secret? And it would probably take me 100 videos to explain it. I've been thinking about it and delving into it for so many countless years, and I can see it in my head with absolute simplicity. It's the reason why I, lovingly tattooed on the inside of my right wrist 1 over 5 to the power, 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3. And people have told me, it's like, well, that's just a number. 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3, of course, is 0.23606. You want to talk about a number, but anytime you actually divide a line underneath a number, then we're talking about an expression. So 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3, well, someone would say, well, that means a number, 0.23606. Well, that's demonstrably true. These are the mathematicians in the analytical minds. There's nothing wrong with having an analytical mind. They actually can't grasp nuance in the fact that 5 to the power of negative 3 against 1, and 5 to the power of negative 3 is nothing other than an expression modality of 1, is an expression in itself. It's the same reason why the mathematical fact is that 1 is the phi, as phi is the 1. And when we talk about phi, people will talk about the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio. People say, well, I love the golden ratio. You got a lot of golden ratio. And here's the golden ratio. This is a slice cut of a nautilus shell, and it follows the proportionality of the golden ratio. But when you ask somebody, it's like, well, you love the golden ratio, but what about it? Well, it's beauty and harmony in nature. I've listened to golden ratio music. I've seen, golden ratio in nature, like this nautilus shell, for example. Well, what does it mean? Yes, it's beautiful, but why is the golden ratio beautiful? They can't tell you, and it's okay not to know. It's like, well, we know you love the golden ratio. You got a golden ratio poster hanging on your wall. You talk about it endlessly. You admire it. It's been a proven fact that babies react positively to beautiful proportionality in faces. This is actually a really neat test that was done a number of years ago. But why do they? A baby that doesn't know how to speak a single word, doesn't know anything other than his mother's and father's faces. Why does a baby, any baby, respond to what we call beauty or proportionality, i.e. the good? What the good is also what the good does. But does is an implicit conceptualization also too created by human beings. We could actually think of it, the extrinsic nature of the absolute, which of course has no first cause. There is no original sin in monistic metaphysics, as perfectly analogous to that of light and illumination. I beg you to think for a few seconds what the distinction or differentiation, if any at all, is between light and illumination. Principle and attribute. Illumination of what, by what, and due to what. Why is light anything at all? How do we know light? Well, we know light because it has an attribute and that it goes forth. Light is actually not an emission. That's one of the beautiful things, too, we could actually understand about the absolute. I could make probably 100 videos about that and go infinitely into the fact that the extrinsic nature of the absolute is not manifesting at all, rather is the means by which manifestation and knowledge of it is able to be known and able to be experienced. Of course, experience is a rather crude word. But I mean, the nature of light is illumination. Light is not an emission. Light doesn't travel. I've said this in many, many countless videos. But when we talk about illumination, we're talking about the extrinsic attribute of light. And it is not something different than light. We're talking about what light is by its nature, such that it has the attribute of illumination. And when you have this, as the ancient saying goes in Pali, when this is present, that is present. When this is not present, then that is not present. So the extrinsic attribute of the absolute is also, too, the absolute. Human beings have differentiated one thing as two things. The reason why the first two numbers of the Fibonacci sequence, by the way, and the Fibonacci sequence is, of course, just the golden ratio. And golden ratio is just a nonsense slang term that humans came up with. Is the golden ratio, it follows the golden ratio. You talk about proportionality of 1 to 5. Yes, that's correct. The reason the first two numbers of the Fibonacci sequence begin with 1 and 1 is not that it's a different one from this one. And people will say that, well, what's the Fibonacci sequence? Just the first 5 digits. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5. Well, let's just talk about those first 2 digits. 1 and 1. Okay, here we got 1, and here we got 1 again. Well, they're not. That second one is not an autonomous one. It's the extrinsic attribute of the absolute, or in the case of this discovery that's tattooed on my right wrist, which is my discovery, thank you so much, 5 to the power of -3, or we could call it a number, 2.3606, etc., 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 but there are no numbers in nature. We're talking about the extrinsic attribute of the absolute, i.e. the euristos dias. The Greeks also too called it ananke. They also too called it tolma. It's extremely hard to explain. It's also kind of like translating the word logos. Depends on how the Greek word logos occurs as to what the translation is, but no one can tell you what logos is unless you actually truly, fundamentally, in its substratum, understand what logos means. It can mean proportionality and ratio. It can mean a lot of different stuff, but it really only means one thing, just as is the case with light and illumination. Light is not one thing and illumination is another. We're talking about the extrinsic attribute of the absolute, which is not different from the absolute. Nothing is that doesn't have an attribute. There is nothing, and this is kind of fascinating if you think about it. You can stop this video and think about it, and guarantee you won't be able to come up with an answer, because it's impossible. Nobody could think about anything, whether it be real or completely imaginary, like a unicorn or a leprechaun or any sort of fantastical nonsense your brain could come up with. Nothing can exist, whether real or imaginary, that doesn't have, at the very least, one attribute. It's impossible. Nothing can be. People say, why is there anything at all rather than nothing? Nihil ex nihilo. It is impossible to even imagine that. It is completely impossible. You could pay someone $1 billion to imagine nothing whatsoever, and yet subject precedes object of negation. Self-negation paradox cannot be enjoined, nor can nothingness be posited. I love it when nihilists and atomists talk about nothingness or the void. People call it shunya. Shunya, by the way, is not nothingness. It's a reference of one thing in relationship to another. X is empty of Y, A is empty of B. There's no such thing as nothingness and emptiness. These are things that don't exist. Things that don't exist like space, time, quantum, shadows, emptiness. These are mere concepts that don't exist at all. But anyway, these are not numbers, and I'm sorry if I mentioned too many numbers. By the way, you should look up Plato's Republic 590 to 511. You actually have to read it really slowly and read between the lines. We're actually talking about an ancient metaphysics. And people say, what's Plato's Republic? Okay, Plato wrote it. No, 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 no. A lot of the stuff attributed to Plato, like the Timaeus and the Parmenides in this divided line section, are extremely antecedent to Plato in time. He actually is the first one that we actually, not the first one, the last or the oldest remaining copy we have of someone who penned it down. But they're not original to Plato at all. They belong to Pythagoreans, and we have no idea, of course, who before them. So phi is to 1 as 1 is to phi. In other words, this golden ratio that people talk about, the proportionality of perfection, divinity, and beauty itself is nothing other than 1. So we actually have the logarithmic expression and the extrapolation of 1 as manifest in mass and magnitude as being beauty, that which is the mirror or the closest semblance to the 1. This uncaused cause, which of course is the impetus behind all things. So when we talk about this Aristos, and I wrote an article about this, it's available for free download. I've posted the links various places. It's so divinely simple. I'm able to see it with, and it took many, many years for me to be able to see it with perfect simplicity. In other words, without even a pretense of thought in my head, to visualize it and see it. And by seeing it, I don't mean literally, obviously, objectively seeing it, but being able to realize what it actually is. And yet it's so incredibly hard to express to someone. How do you express the proportionality and the meaning of illumination's relationship to light? Well, what do we mean by illumination? The illumination, of course, that we refer to is the extrinsic attribute of light itself. As I've said before many times, once again, light is not an emission, light doesn't travel, light doesn't have a speed, its rate of induction also too. The hysteresis of the ether, whereby which the manifestation is able, the disturbance of the medium itself, which is all around us and everywhere, and also too that which we're composed of fundamentally, since matter itself is nothing other than super high energy light. Everything is the ether, i.e. an ether perturbation modality, both being fields and matter, because we must, of course, embrace a grand unified theory of which there are not many things. Light over here, electromagnetism over here, magnetism here, gravity over here. Nature could never ever work that way. No paradigm of the universe, whether it be religious, metaphysical, logical, I'll not use the word scientific because scientific is not a belief system, however we use it like a belief system now. They all agree that there must be one thing and one thing only fundamentally. And then, of course, we have to harken back to Nikola Tesla, who said that we have to think of everything as vibration and frequency. And he's right. At extremely high frequency, we have fundamental matter. So the reconciliation of light and matter, as I've done many times, has been reconciled. But then we actually have to understand, why is there anything at all? And people ask this question. People that are intelligent, actually to have some wisdom, I shouldn't say intelligent, people that have wisdom, ask themselves the question, why is there anything at all? And the answer to that is abstruse. It has to do with understanding incommensurability. It has to do with understanding proportionality of the one to its attribute, or the proportionality of explaining light and its relationship to illumination, which of course are not two things rather than one. And also, too, gets to the matter of you having fundamental understanding of the first two numbers of the Fibonacci sequence, which are 1 and 1, which are not two different ones. So we got 1 here, and the second digit of the Fibonacci sequence is also, no, they're both exactly one and the same thing, principle and attribute. In other words, the agathon and the aoristos dias, i.e. the absolute and the indefinite dyad. And the reason we call it indefinite is because it is not demonstrable. It is the extrinsic attribute of the first digit, which is 1 itself. The one which is most divine, and the one which is both beauty, proportionality, and of course perfection. So the extrapolation of that, and by the way, that's the Pythagorean triangle tattooed upside down right now on my hand. Pythagorean triangle, which is a 108, 36, 36 isosceles triangle, has the only geometry in the universe which is the perfect proportionality of that expression, which is 1 over 5 to the power of negative 3, which would be the apex right here. And at the base, we actually have phi, and the two slopes are proportionality of 1, and the incommensurable cut thereof is 1 over phi. And therein, we actually have all of the 4 sections of the divided line, where you take a line divided unevenly, and then take those 2 sections and divide it unevenly again, where we have phi, 1, 1, and 1 over phi as the 4 sections, the totality of which are phi cubed. Explaining why is it cubed rather than squared would take a whole other video, and it's even deeper. I don't know if you want me to make that video or not, but why is it phi cubed instead of phi squared? Well, and then we have to get into explaining the Trinity. Explaining the Trinity is not too hard. The Christian Trinity, by the way, came from this Platonic and Pythagorean Trinity, where we also, too, and there's a Trinity in the first 5 digits of the Fibonacci sequence, by the way, too. 1 and 1 is the first section, i.e. the absolute and its attribute. 2 and 3, which are magnitude and matter. Yeah? And the magnitude and matter gives birth to time. Time is number 4, and that's why 4 doesn't exist in the first 5 digits of the Fibonacci sequence, which also means death. In many languages also, the number 4 means death. The reason why it means death is because anything that actually experiences time is subject to death, but 4 is not in. Time doesn't exist. Time is not a thing at all. It can't be bent vis-a-vis the relativists and Einstein. It doesn't exist at all. It's only a measure. So 1 and 1, the principle and the attribute, magnitude and matter as the second, and the third is the consubstantiality of both, which is ontos, or being. Sentience, existential sentience, of course, not metaphysical awareness, which does exist to disembodied beings. And it still, after all these years, shocks me that something so simple, so divinely simple at its fundamental core, is so draining to explain to people, because mere words don't convey meaning. And yet, words are, I think I'm going to quote a movie from, wasn't it, the V for Vendetta, words are the means to meaning. Isn't that the way V for Vendetta movie said that? I could go deeper down the rabbit hole on the Trinity, if people like, but I wanted to encapsulate all of this within 20 or 25 minutes of this video, however long it's been, to at least paint the whole circle, if not go into extreme detail and depth on each aspect of the circle that I tried to paint in this short little video. But this is the secret of the divided line of Plato. It's also, too, the secret of incommensurability that was held by the Pythagoreans. And it's also, too, the secret that's buried so deeply in 509d to 511. It's also, too, buried in Plato's cave. If you actually look at the proportionality of the sun and the fire and the prisoners and the cave wall, it also, too, is that exact same proportionality. My discovery, by the way. Nature and the absolute don't partake in numbers, and yet numbers are just another language we use to express things. But the numbers themselves don't exist. Mathematicians get caught up in numbers. Human beings get caught up in numbers and listen and count numbers, but the numbers are just the means to paint a visual picture inside one's head, to expose and comprehend, the great questions that we ask about the absolute. So I hope I made that more clear. It's really, really difficult to explain something so profound, especially in a small video, but at least I painted the whole circle of what I meant to discuss in this video. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.